Ethan Walker stepped into the small diner, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filling the air. It was a stark contrast to the luxurious restaurants he was accustomed to, but something about the place felt warm, almost nostalgic. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit as he made his way to an empty booth by the window, his mind preoccupied with business meetings and stock market trends. As he settled in, he glanced around, taking in the sight of families chatting over pancakes, an elderly couple sharing a quiet breakfast, and a group of teenagers laughing at the counter. It was a simple scene, yet it held a certain charm. He sighed, reaching for the menu, when suddenly a familiar figure caught his eye. A waitress rushed between tables, her tray balanced with practiced ease, her movements quick yet graceful. There was something about the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the way she tilted her head when taking an order. Ethan's breath hitched as recognition slammed into him like a freight train. It couldn't be. His eyes followed her as she weaved through the crowded diner, a soft smile on her lips as she placed plates in front of customers. Her uniform was slightly worn, her shoes scuffed from long hours on her feet, but there was no mistaking her. Claire. His heart pounded as memories of late-night study sessions, endless debates about their future, and shared laughter over cheap college pizza flooded his mind. He had lost touch with her after graduation. They had gone their separate ways, he into the world of billion-dollar investments, and she into a career she had once been so passionate about. But this wasn't the future she had dreamed of. As if sensing his gaze, Claire turned toward him, a notepad in her hand. Their eyes met. For a moment, time stood still. The smile on her face faltered, replaced by a look of shock. Then, just as quickly, she masked it with professionalism. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her voice composed, but he could hear the slight tremor beneath it. Ethan stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Claire?" She hesitated, gripping the notepad a little tighter. "Ethan, wow." Her lips parted as if she wanted to say more, but the words never came. He took a step closer, studying her face. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, a tiredness that hadn't been there before. But beyond that, she was still Claire. The same intelligent, determined woman he had admired back in college. "What are you doing here?" he finally asked, his voice gentle. Claire glanced around, as if suddenly aware that they had an audience. Customers were still eating, oblivious to their conversation, but she could feel the eyes of her co-workers stealing curious glances. "I work here," she said simply, offering a small, forced smile. "Been here for a while now." Ethan frowned. This wasn't right. Claire had always dreamed of making a difference in the world. She had talked about working for a top firm, climbing the corporate ladder, using her skills to create something meaningful. A waitress? Not that there was anything wrong with it, but it wasn't her dream. "Can we talk?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty seat across from him. Claire hesitated again, looking toward the kitchen. I'm still on my shift." Ethan nodded, understanding the unspoken words. She didn't want to have this conversation here, in front of everyone. "How long until your break?" 10 minutes, she admitted. "Then I'll wait," he said without hesitation. She studied him for a moment as if weighing her options. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Okay, I'll be back." Ethan watched as she walked away, his mind racing. He had expected to run into familiar faces in his life, but never like this. There was more to Claire's story, and he intended to find out what had happened. Ethan sat at the booth, his fingers tapping lightly against the table as he watched Claire move through the diner. She looked different from the ambitious young woman he had known in college, yet there was still something familiar in her presence. He had so many questions, but he knew he had to tread carefully. Whatever had led her here, it wasn't something she was eager to talk about. A few minutes later, Claire approached his table, this time without her notepad or tray. She slid into the seat across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Her fingers tapped against the ceramic, a nervous habit he remembered from their long nights of cramming for exams. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, forcing a small smile. "Neither did I," Ethan admitted. "I was passing through and decided to stop for a quick bite. Never thought I'd run into you." He hesitated before asking, "How have you been, Claire?" She let out a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, you know, life happens." She took a sip of her coffee, avoiding his gaze. Ethan didn't push, but he wasn't going to let it go either. "The last time we talked, you had big plans. You were going to work for one of the top firms. What happened?" Claire sighed, setting her cup down. "It's a long story. I've got time." She stared at him for a moment, then exhaled. "After graduation, I landed my dream job at a great company. It was everything I had worked for, until it wasn't. A few years in, the company went through downsizing. I was one of the first to go." She shrugged. "I thought I'd bounce back quickly, but the job market wasn't as forgiving as I'd hoped. I had bills, student loans. Things started piling up. I took whatever work I could get, but nothing lasted. Eventually I ended up here." Ethan listened intently, his jaw tightening as she spoke. He had always known Claire as someone strong, someone who never gave up. The fact that she had struggled for so long without reaching out hurt more than he expected. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked softly. Claire laughed, shaking her head. "What would I have said? Hey, Ethan, I know you're out there making millions, but I can't even keep a job. I didn't want your pity." "It's not pity," Ethan said firmly. "It's friendship." He leaned forward. "Claire, you were one of the smartest people I knew. You don't belong here, struggling just to get by." She looked down at her coffee, her fingers tightening around the cup. "Life doesn't always go as planned, Ethan." "I know that," he said, "but that doesn't mean you stop fighting for what you want." She let out a breath, shaking her head. "I don't even know what I want anymore." Ethan studied her for a moment before speaking. "What if I told you I could help?" Claire looked up, her brows furrowed. "Help how?" "I have a company. It's growing fast, and I need someone with your skills, someone I can trust," he said. "There's a position for you if you want it." Her eyes widened. "You mean a real job?" Ethan smiled. "Not just any job, a fresh start." Claire blinked, her expression unreadable. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because you deserve it," he said simply, "and because I believe in you." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, her eyes filled with tears. She looked away, trying to compose herself, but Ethan could see the emotions written all over her face. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Ethan said with a grin. Claire let out a shaky breath before finally meeting his gaze, and for the first time in years, hope flickered in her eyes.